Well, hi, welcome back to the Godwit Podcast. My name's David Kowalick.
And I'm Paul Smith. And we're continuing our series on righteousness and justification. And now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of faith, justification by faith versus works.
Yeah.
Or versus the law.
The moment you say that, there's a whole bunch of things that people are going to be thinking. And again, like we said last week, although we're still wearing the same clothes as last week.
I'm not.
Oh, you're not?
You are.
Yeah, I am. Oh, gosh. I've been wearing these same clothes for a week. By now he stinketh.
Just like the week before.
Yeah, right. Anyway, a lot of people are going to be thinking in terms of the framework of a a reformed kind of understanding that the big problem is of a conflict between earning merit with God through doing good things versus trusting in what God has done in Jesus Christ, as if that's the big dichotomy there. What we're trying to say is that's not really the big issue. The big issue is, do you trust in what God's doing in Jesus the Messiah, or are you going to trust in something else? And you can even be trusting in something which is essentially good, but then you put your emphasis on your bloodline or confidence in something else other than Jesus himself.
Yeah.
So
if you're just joining us now because justification by faith is a popular topic, this is actually part, 6 or 7 in a series.
Yeah.
And we're building off of arguments we've laid down in over several episodes. So if you're jumping in now, maybe go back and watch some other stuff.
Yeah.
Or it won't make sense.
Yeah. Even go right back to the very first video and look at the whole kingdom of God thing, because that really creates the context for everything else.
Yeah. One of the difficulties that people have in this discussion of justification by faith versus works of the law is that we want it to be applicable to us in our context. And it's not directly. It's actually very contextual to the time.
Yep.
For them at the time, they were actually doing a transition from one covenant to another.
Yeah.
And we're not.
And in the Romans in particular, it was actually, there was a conflict between Jews and Gentiles in an actual local church where these things were being brought to the fore because power was shifting away from the Jews to the Gentiles. And now the Jews had come back into town and were trying to get back in. And then Paul's trying to say, hey, look, you're all one new people now because you're all in the Messiah Jesus. That's what makes you one people. It doesn't matter whether you got Jewish bloodlines or whether you got Gentile bloodlines or whether you are circumcised or whether you're not.
So the discussion of faith, justification or being righteous by faith, not by works or not by law, that Paul talks about in particular in Romans and Galatians. We talked about in our last episode that the context for that is a transition from one covenant to another. It's from the old covenant to the new. But in both letters, he goes back to before the Mosaic covenant, which is the law. The Israelite law is the Mosaic covenant, but before that is the promises to Abraham.
Yeah.
And so Paul in Romans and Galatians goes back to the promise to Abraham that God says to Abraham, through you, all nations in the world will be blessed. And actually says here in Galatians chapter 3 from verse 6. So we've talked in the past about in Romans 4, how Paul says about justification by faith. He refers to Abraham, that Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. He was righteous by faith. Before he was circumcised, before he'd done anything, he believed God, and we need to talk about what that means. And God said, yes, that's right, you're righteous. Paul brings up the same thing in Galatians. Consider Abraham. He believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Understand then that those who believe are children of Abraham. The scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announced the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. So those who have faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. He actually says there, God announced the gospel in advance to Abraham And what does he say is the gospel? All nations will be blessed through you. And earlier in Galatians, he says, if anyone comes and preaches to you a gospel other than the one you've heard, let them be eternally condemned. Like he's really upset about a false gospel. And some people would say that what we've preached is a false gospel because it's different to the Reformation gospel.
That's right.
But Paul's, and they try and say that the storyline in Galatians is people trying to earn merit by doing good works is a false gospel. You need to trust in the sufficiency of Christ's sacrifice. That's the true gospel. No, Paul says here what the gospel is. This isn't the fullest explanation. But when he refers to the gospel here, he's saying that the gospel, which we know is the kingdom of God, is the bringing of all nations back under God's rule. And another way of saying that is through Abraham, all nations will be blessed by coming under the rule of God and returning to their original vocation, right?
Well, I think he's actually making an assumption there that they know what the gospel is because he went there, he preached the gospel, and he put it all out there for them. But so Galatians isn't actually about the gospel per se. It's about not falling away from the gospel by dividing yourself up into Jews and Gentiles, or saying that Gentile people have to act like Jews in order to be put right with God, when in actual fact they're put right with God through Jesus the Messiah. The Gentiles believe that. The Jews believe that. They've got different cultures, but they're all one new people in Jesus. And so it's believing in Jesus that's the big deal. And so that's assumed, but this is actually a polemic sort of a thing. He's saying there's Jewish people now telling Gentile people that you have to get circumcised and you have to eat kosher food and, keep the Sabbath and so on. And the moment you start doing that, then you're not trusting in God anymore. So the works there isn't so much like doing good works, because that's actually a good thing to do. It's more, and it's not about earning, it's about cultural identity. And the Jews were saying, we're the true people of God and you have to be like us to be true people of God. But in the very act of doing that, you're not trusting, you're not living by faith anymore. You're not trusting in what God has done for us in the Messiah Jesus. You're trusting in cultural identity, which is a whole other thing. And so you can mess that up two different ways. You can do that by saying, I'm a Jew, therefore I'm right because I've got the right bloodline and I'll keep the right, Jewish customs. Or you can say, I'm not right because I'm not keeping the Jewish customs as a Gentile, and that if I do, then I'll be all right. But you're both making the same mistake from different points of view. It's really about rejecting Jesus. In fact, Jesus said something pretty similar in John 16. He said, when the Spirit comes, he will convict the world in regard to sin, righteousness, and judgment, in regard to sin, because people do not believe in me. In actual fact, I think it rightly understood it says, when the Spirit comes, he'll show the world to be wrong about sin and about righteousness and about judgment. They're going to get it all wrong, but the Spirit will correct them and show them that sin is not about just mere morality or keeping the 10 Commandments or something like that, but rather it's about, do you trust in Jesus? That's the big thing. That's the core problem. Do you trust in Jesus or don't you? The other things are peripheral, and the Spirit will show you that the core thing is trusting in Jesus or not trusting in Jesus. That's the big deal.
Yeah, but even when you say trusting in Jesus...
Yeah, that's the wrong word.
A lot of people will interpret trust as going back to the default mode of, trusting in Jesus is just resting on the efficiency or the efficacy of his sacrifice for my sins and propitiating God.
Yeah.
And so I'm good.
Yeah.
And that's what trusting Jesus means to a lot of people.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But in actual fact, of course, believing and trusting, we're not going to cover that in detail this time, but what we've come to understand, and we recommend the book by Matthew Bates, Salvation by Allegiance Alone, in which he makes the point that a better translation or understanding of the word faith is more like putting your allegiance with someone, or as Michael Heiser would put it, he would say it's believing loyalty. So, for instance, if I keep faith with my wife, that means that I will be loyal to her and I'll forsake all others. Or if I'm faithful to a political party, then I will keep the tenets of the party and I will follow them and serve them to the best of my ability. And so that the understanding of faith shouldn't be some kind of passive thing where we're just believing certain true facts. That has become what faith is largely understood at. Or as I heard one person saying, faith is all about taking risk. That may be an element, but it's certainly not the core of faith. Faith is allegiance. It's saying Jesus is my king, and whatever that means, I'm going to be part of. So it's not passive in the way that it so often is told. And yet, largely, I was taught that faith is kind of like a good kind of faith is receiving what God is giving, but doing that passively. If you're involved in any way whatsoever in doing anything to obtain something, or you look like you've got a bead of sweat on your face, then you've blown the whole thing. You know, you're not allowed to do anything. You know,
it's like there's this weird thing where people think that it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah,
and God's got infinite glory, but if we contribute in any way, then he won't have infinite glory. He'll have nearly infinite glory. And anything that we contribute at all to the picture, if God isn't 100% the hero all the time, and we're not 100% the damsel in distress needing rescue and completely useless, then God doesn't get enough glory.
Well, at one level, there is some truth in that, though, because
what?
No, at one level, just hear me out.
All right.
So my contribution to this whole thing really was, so Jesus is the one who's rescued me. And he's rescued me not in the sense of I've tried really hard and haven't got there, but, you know, I'm on a sinking ship. I can't swim. It's on fire and it's seconds away from exploding. Jesus reaches in and grabs me. My contribution to this was setting the boat on fire and sinking it, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying that. But the response, the way we respond to what God does is not merely passive. There is, so while we can't take any, there's no claim that we can make. I can't boast about anything that I've done, but what I can do is I can say, wow, this is amazing. And then I get on board and get active and get involved. Like Paul said in Corinthians, he said that I'm the least of all the apostles, as one, who persecuted the church and so on, least deserving of them all. But I am what I am by the grace of God, and I work harder than them all. So as far as he's concerned, grace meant that he got to a place where he worked harder than any of the other apostles because he had received so much more blessing.
Yeah.
And so he was able to say the outcome of faith is work. And even the famous passage in Ephesians chapter 2, everyone quotes Ephesians 2 verse 8, which says,
as by grace you've been saved through faith.
Yeah.
And this is not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works that no one
can boast.
And
then what does it say?
For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works.
To do good works.
Which he prepared in advance for us to do.
Exactly.
And in 1 Thessalonians, Paul starts his letter to the Thessalonians, Paul, Silas, and Timothy, by saying in verse 3, we continually remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith, your labor prompted by love, and your endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Or here's another one in Colossians chapter 1, verse 9. It says, we continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, giving joyful thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light.
Yeah.
So it's still all grace. I mean, it's God who qualifies, but then the natural response is work and fruit bearing. And Jesus said as much in John 15, it is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit. And if you abide in me, you will bear much fruit. So there's the natural outcome of faith and of, loyal allegiance and trusting in Jesus Christ and giving your allegiance to him is that you will do what pleases him and not just be passive.
Yeah.
So many times I hear messages about faith and grace as if it's actually a virtue that you sit around like a bag of old salad in the sun. Just say, just bring in that grace and stack it here. I'll absorb that later.
And unless you do, that's works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there's actually some really good scholarship on what Paul means by works in these letters, and in particular, works of the law. There's a book that I haven't read, but I want to, but I've listened to interviews with this guy. So I've got the general synopsis of it. I think it's called Paul's Works of the Law in Early Church Reception. And it's about, the early church fathers, like the next generation after the apostles, the ones that wrote stuff, how did they interpret what works of the law were?
Yep.
And he says that they interpret it, like he did this whole big study on it, they interpret it the same way people like N.T. Wright do, and people involved in what's being called the new perspective on Paul, which we haven't talked about, but if you know what that is. And that is that works of the law in Romans and Galatians in Paul's letters is referring to the things of the Mosaic law that distinguish Jews from everyone else.
Yeah.
Which is why there's so much. I mean, like I said in the last episode, you read Romans 2-4 and the discussion of the comparison of Jew and Gentile and circumcision and uncircumcision. Circumcision's a major thing in there.
Yeah.
In Galatians, circumcision is the issue, the central issue, because circumcision is the thing that distinguished Jews from Gentiles.
Yeah.
And Paul says in Galatians 5, mark my words, like he's really upset about it. He says, mark my words, I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, though, when he says that, he's speaking to Jewish people who are being influenced by
Gentiles.
Gentile people who are being influenced by Jewish people to go and get circumcised in order to come up to grade or to be part of the special people, because that is the thing that makes you a special person. But he's not saying that to a Jewish person. He's not saying that Jewish people shouldn't be circumcised.
Yeah.
It's only to Gentiles.
It's just to a Gentile church, and there's other context in the letter, is that there's people that came, that they're known as the Judaizers, that we're saying to this Gentile church, oh, you guys think you're Christians, that's cute. You actually have to, you're only second class.
Yeah.
You actually have to be circumcised and come under the full Mosaic law because to really be Christians, because Christianity is a Jewish thing.
Yeah,
it's our thing.
Yeah,
and it's great that it's been open to you guys, but only through us.
Yeah,
you've got to get circumcised and come under the Mosaic law. Paul gets really upset about that, to the point where he says in chapter 5, verse 12, as for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves.
What does that actually mean?
Emasculate themselves? I think it just means, you know how women can sometimes talk to men in a way that makes them feel less than manly. I think that's what it meant. Just talk to yourself as if you were no.
I think he actually said, I think they would wish they'd go the whole way and cut their balls off, actually. And
which is savage.
It is pretty savage.
Savage.
But what that shows is the level of passion he had about it.
Yeah.
This is really a big issue for him. This is like, end of the gospel, destroying your faith, you're going to wreck everything. And interestingly, this all happened, I think it was about 6 months after he preached there. It was really quick. It wasn't years later. He'd preached, they'd got on board, they'd had this amazing experience, encountered Jesus, the Spirit had been given to them as a gift, and it was all on, And then 6 months later, he's like, I can't believe this is happening already.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, far out, And so he's really, I think he's just quite angry, and he's dashed this letter off. It's like, I can't believe this is happening. And his anger is white hot.
Yeah.
Because it is a red hot issue, and it still is today, to this very day. But I think it's been wrongly interpreted as if Paul would say,
why are you trying to earn enough merit to get in?
Yeah. And sure, if people were doing that, that would be a thing. But I find that even people who are just, trying to bear fruit and trying to find out what pleases God and doing it, you can get in trouble for doing that. It's like, oh, you're just working, you're just a person of works. You're not a person of faith. You're not a person who is of grace. You're a person who's trying to earn your way in.
I actually heard a podcast. It was a leadership podcast. I don't know how much you love them. But it was a leadership podcast. I think it's from a guy who's probably got the most popular Christian leadership podcast. It was a few years ago, and it was a few guys chatting. And someone was telling this story of baptisms in their church. And they told the story of this teenage girl who had a fairly radical salvation and was getting baptized. And when she was asked at the time, like in the baptism ceremony, why are you getting baptized? Like, give your testimony. She said, because God has given me so much and I want to give myself back to him. And on this podcast, the leader was like, in this really condescending way, her theology is so wrong. We can't give anything to God. Yeah. That's not the point. We don't try and give back to God. And I was listening to a guy and, man, his theology is so wrong. This teenage girl had it right.
Yeah.
That is what baptism is. It's a we actually need to do an episode on baptism. But it's I think you've mentioned briefly before that baptism is a sign of, it's a ceremony of giving your full allegiance even to death to somebody.
That's right.
It literally is, I'm giving my whole life and allegiance to you.
And it's a physical pledge. It's like a public declaration that my allegiance is now changing, and whatever I was following or whoever I was giving my allegiance to before, I now break that and I'm giving it to someone else. In fact, Roman soldiers would take swear an oath called the sacramentum, which I believe is actually where the word sacrament comes from. And the church pretty much adopted that same thing and says, what we're going to do is, like the Roman soldiers, swear an oath to Jesus as the true captain of my soul instead of to the captain of the army. And so it was, and people got put to death for it too. It was because it was seen as seditious to get baptized, and still is in some places. Like, I won't mention what countries, but there are countries in the world where if you got baptized and made that declaration, you could be put to death. So, what we can say, and I think this is okay to say this, is that everything we do as believers is responsive. We're not the initiators.
Yeah.
And of course, we're going to agree with anyone who says that. But you go right back to the beginning, to Genesis chapter 4, and the first man who was called righteous, Abel, he made an offering. Yeah. And he was doing it, and I'm going to explain this another time in another video, but he was doing it in response to what God had done. He was living and breathing in the goodness of God, and he was thankful, and the overflow of his gratefulness caused him to respond. And yes, we can say that Cain, on the other hand, was not trying to be a responder. He was trying to be initiator and get things from God in a normal sort of a pagan way. And yes, there is truth in that, and I think that's where a lot of people who have a more reformed background think in those terms, and it's correct up to that point. But then to take it to say you cannot give anything to God, when in fact the Bible's full of people giving things to God.
Yeah.
And God receiving it and being happy to have done it. In fact, we're even instructed to find out what pleases God and to do it.
Yeah. And live a life, make every effort.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we can't say effort.
Not on camera. Not on camera.
I'll have to censor that. We can't say effort. Make every to and Paul says Paul says I strive.
Yeah. Strive. Oh,
Oh, that's
no.
another dirty word. Can't say strive.
Yeah, not
Can't
only
say effort. Can't say strive.
no.
He says, make every effort to live a life worthy of the calling you have received.
Yeah.
He says, I strive to reach the goal. I'll beat my body and make it my slave. Do everything in my power that after I've preached to others, I myself won't be disqualified.
Yeah.
There's a lot of effort language in Paul.
Yeah, but the effort, and we have to reiterate this: the effort is responsive effort.
It's responsive. Yeah,
he's not trying to earn anything. It's not even a concept in his head.
Well, let me give an analogy picture of how I think it works together. We're like orphan drug addict slaves, right? Which is a real scenario for real people in the world. Sold into slavery, no parents, addicted to drugs, kept in slavery, right? We're in that condition and no way of getting out.
Yeah.
Someone comes and rescues us out of that situation, gives us healing. But it's not just a rescue. That's not where it ends. It's not like I'll get you out of that situation and then now you fend for yourself. And it's not how I think a lot of Christians see it is rescue you out of that situation and then you come and you get adopted, come into the family and stay perpetually a young child. Don't do anything, just play video games and eat ice cream all day. You're rescued from being an orphan slave to being part of a family where you don't contribute at all. You just receive because that's what the Father wants. What it actually is you're rescued out of that situation, adopted into the family, and the Father is a successful business person who trains you in the family business and brings you in and gives you the resources and everything to then become part of a successful part of being middle management in your Father's family business.
Oh, you take the story.
That's more like what the Christian story is. And we get stuck on, yes, God rescues us out of slavery. So, but he has to be the hero, so we can't do anything from then on. But his whole plan is to make us successful.
Yeah.
Like, what parent doesn't want their child to be successful? Like, if you get to old age and you've got adult children and they're still living at home and living off your wage and are useless, and you're caring for them as if they're a 3-year-old, you're a failure of a parent. That's not to your credit.
No, that's right.
You don't get glory from that.
No.
God doesn't. Where does this idea come from that God gets glory from us just being grateful lumps? I'm just a lump and I'm just grateful that God's done everything for me. That doesn't give him glory. Do you know what does give God glory?
Yeah, fruitfulness.
Yeah. Us being, like, he's heaps excited about us being what he's designed us to be. Yeah. Which is fruitful, productive stewards over the creation. Yeah. That is salvation, our restoration into that.
Yeah, and we practice now what we will be doing in eternity, which is we're going to be working. We've got a vocation, a job to do, to rule and to reign on the earth as proxies of God, and this life and the suffering we have now is partly in training for that. Yeah, and so it pleases God when we respond to it. It's still responsive, but it's a real wonderful privilege to be able to respond in that way. I always think of the story of the prodigal son, and that story is one of those stories that's always told as if he got the fatted calf and there was a party and all that, and that's where it stops. But of course, after the party finished, what happened to the prodigal son? He was back on farm duty.
Working.
He was working, and working with his grumpy older brother. And of course, you can look at the older brother and say, all these years I've been slaving for you. Yeah, he was trying to earn his own way and he was trying to manipulate his father into getting things. So he had the wrong idea. But then it's also just as wrong to have the idea that the prodigal son's just sitting around like a bag of old salad, just doing whatever.
Because the story ends with the party. Yeah. People think
that's all there is.
That's it. And
it's party time.
He just keeps having parties.
No, he would have had to get back on the tractor, or the mule or whatever and do the work. And the older son would have had to learn to be happy that his younger brother had been saved.
And the older brother also probably needed to learn that he could have parties too.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what the father says to him. Is like,
exactly.
Well, you could have.
Anytime you wanted. Everything I have belongs to you.
Everything I have belongs to you. Yeah.
And so he was trying to earn what he already had. But just because that is wrong doesn't mean that it's right for the prodigal son to sit around just absorbing goodness and doing nothing.
Yeah.
It's both of them have got a problem, but they've got different problems.
Yeah.
And I think the Western Reformed kind of church, the evangelicals, the Pentecostals and so on, I think we've been so steeped in Reformation thinking that we've got to a point where we can't really do anything. We can't contribute in any way.
Yeah, because that's self-righteousness.
Self-righteousness, when in actual fact, a person who knows that they've been declared right by the goodness of God actually wants to be a contributor, and you're free to be a contributor. That's the whole point.
Which is what we're saved for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we're getting at here is this this argument that Paul's making in Romans and Galatians, where he pits justification by faith against works of the law. There's good scholarship, and I'll link to a couple of references that we've made in this podcast, like Matthew Bates's work and Matthew Thomas's work, that faith actually means faithfulness.
Yeah.
It's a relational, it's a active relationship that you participate in.
Yeah.
Not just something you think.
Yeah.
It's by actively relating to God in faithfulness that's how we're justified.
Yeah.
And Paul says that's how Abraham was justified. That's how other people in the Old Testament were justified, which is why he quotes from, is it Micah? In both Romans and Galatians, the just will live by faith.
Habakkuk.
Oh, Habakkuk.
Yeah.
The just will live by faith. Yeah. And he uses the Old Testament to say, see, righteousness and justification come by faith in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And it's the same in the New
Yeah.
Testament, but it all now revolves around Jesus. The format revolves around Jesus. And works of the law, which Paul is opposed to, this is where the work of people like N.T. Wright and Matthew Thomas come in to say, no, works of the law isn't the Lutheran, what Luther in particular championed, the idea that we do good works to earn merit. That's not what it's about. It's specifically about doing the things that make someone part of the Jewish Mosaic covenant, circumcision in particular. But circumcision, Paul says, if you get circumcised, you have to follow all of the Mosaic law.
Yeah, to make it effective, yeah.
And you have to be distinct from all the nations. The whole point of the promise to Abraham was to bring all the nations in, not keep one nation distinct from all the others anymore. No. So that's the context. And when he gets really angry in Galatians,
really angry, white hot.
In chapter 5, a picture that I use to kind of explain that is that he's angry when you see the progression of covenants. Like a human covenant progression that we have is in marriage, right? Different cultures have a different format. I'm talking from our culture in Australia. You start with dating, as in like you spend time with someone that you think is a potential mate.
Yeah.
And you actually start with faithfulness there. Like when I met my now wife, as soon as I started showing interest in her romantically, I was right from then choosing to be faithful to her because I couldn't go date other girls. That would be unfaithful. I wasn't even considering anyone else now that I was looking at her as potential life partner. Then the next stage was engagement, where it was formalized. And it took things to the next stage, but it was still undergirded by faithfulness. Like I was choosing her as opposed to every other woman on the planet.
Yeah.
When we got married, it was taken to the fulfilled level of the journey in terms of covenants. We made a marriage covenant where we committed to faithfulness for life, but it was still built on the faithfulness that I'd already chosen earlier, right? But it was confirmed by a new process and a new covenant. Now, if after getting married, now each part of that journey is important. The engagement period is really important, and it's actually really good. Like the engagement time is really good. But once we got married, if I went to acting like we were engaged, living in separate houses and all that kind of stuff, her family would rightfully get very angry at me, just like Paul got angry at the Galatian church.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not that the engagement period's bad. It's not. It's really good. But once you're married, going back to it's bad. It's like, what are you doing? That's outrageous. You're literally like spitting on the marriage if you go back to a different format, an older format. And that's what Paul's doing. It's not that the former covenant was bad. It's that now we're in a different one. And to go back to it is bad. Or more particularly, to get people who weren't in that one, who now who've just come in straight to the marriage thing, to get them to go back to being engaged. He's like, nah, that is not on.
Yeah. Well, both the Jew and the Gentile have to move forward. The Jew has to recognize that the old covenant is superseded, and the Gentile has to just go straight forward and not be diverted into Judaism to get confidence before God. So both of them have to join together and become part of one new family. And so the distinction of Jew and Gentile disappears in the church. Even though you may still be culturally a Jew, you may still be culturally a Gentile, in the same way that you're still a woman, you're still a man, but the distinction between men and women disappears in the church.
Yeah.
And Paul actually makes that point in Galatians. There's no more Jew or Gentile, male or female, and I think slave or free. So all of those distinctions, even though you live in them, they are no longer relevant to your identity as part of the gathered people, the holy ones of God, who are part of the family of God. So don't let those distinctions get in the way, and whether you're a Jew or a Gentile makes no difference. So there's a lot more we could say about this, but we've said enough of it, I think.
Yeah. Maybe to tie together the last few episodes, we've sort of laid a foundation of what is righteousness. Righteousness is doing the right thing. Justification is the declaration that someone is righteous. When we get to justification by faith, Paul's making the argument that the biggest umbrella thing for how someone is considered righteous by God, who God justifies, who God says is righteous, are those who are faithful to him. Who have faith. Faith is a relational connection of believing, loyalty, and allegiance. Those who are faithful to God are righteous.
Who keep faith with God, like you keep faith with your wife, or you keep faith with your political party, or you keep faith with your nation, that kind of thing.
And we've talked in other episodes about how that doesn't necessarily mean moral perfection.
No.
Or it doesn't mean moral perfection for us. And it doesn't necessarily mean every single action, but it even means that when you get things wrong, that being faithful to God is coming back, is reorienting. Just like faithfulness in marriage is when you do the wrong thing by your spouse, you apologize. You said, I think last episode, you say sorry and mean it, and you have to do that a lot.
You do it a lot and forgive a lot. You forgive a lot and you apologize a lot. That's how marriage works.
And faithfulness between us and God is similar, except God never has to say sorry because he doesn't. We have to say sorry a lot, and he forgives a lot.
He forgives a lot,
But faith is that you keep going. So the story of the tax collector who beat his chest and called on the mercy of God, like he was being faithful to God in acknowledging his sin, acknowledging God's position, and doing the right thing of like asking for mercy. That's faithfulness. And Paul's saying that was what made people righteous in the Old Testament, and it's still what makes people righteous now.
Yep.
But everything is changed in the Messiah, in that he is the focal point
Yep.
of faith
For the Jew and the Gentile.
for the Jew and it's now open
to the whole world.
It's now open to the whole world. He's the fulfilling Israel's call to bring all the nations back, and he's opened up the new covenant to every nation. And so whoever, Jew or Gentile, is faithful to the Messiah is the righteous, is
That's
one of
right.
the righteous people.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's how we're tied all together.
Okay. Well, I think we've probably said enough for this episode, but for me, it's actually brought up a bunch of other things that we need to talk about, but we haven't got time for it now.
There's so many rabbit holes we could go down. so many
rabbit
tangents.
holes.
Yeah.
We'll probably talk about those rabbit holes after we finish recording and start looking forward to what we're going to do next week. So stay tuned, and goodbye for now.
Thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.